Hi guys, welcome back to The Contented Plant. Today we are going to be talking all about the care for my Marble Queen Pothos plant. I absolutely love this plant. It's definitely one of my favorites, so let's get started. So this is my Marble Queen Pothos. I have had this plant for about 3 years. You can see it is just so beautiful, so long. She just has tons of long, beautiful lines that I am obsessed with. I have propagated and given this plant to many of my friends that love plants, and it is just so fun. These are just the gift that keeps on giving. So you can find this plant growing in a lot of warm tropical areas. It can survive outside in hot, humid areas like Florida. It is considered an invasive plant if it's grown outside because they do take over quite quickly. So I would not recommend growing it outside unless you have it in a container where you can contain the spread and not have it just take over some poor tree out there in the wild. So the Marble Queen gets its name from these absolutely beautiful variegated leaves that kind of have this marbling effect on them. You can see that color is just marbled and splashed throughout the plant, and it is so pretty. One of my favorite things about this plant is that you can get very different leaves depending on which stem you have coming out of the plant. Some of them you can even get this really pretty half moon where half of the leaf is green and half of it is variegated. This stem has a lot of those that I just think are so cool and so pretty. This plant is very easy to care for. It really does not require a whole lot besides even watering. You're going to fertilize it every couple months in the growing season, and you want to provide it with the appropriate lighting. I would say for this plant, lighting is the most important in its care if you want to maintain that beautiful variegation. You can grow this plant in an area with lower light. However, if you do, you risk your leaves kind of reverting back to green. You can see that there's this jade green here, and I love this plant as a great example for that because I have this plant sitting back up here on my china cabinet. This side of the plant, which you can see is a darker green side of the plant, is on that side of the cabinet and it's farther back from the light source. This side of the plant, where you can see it is beautiful, variegated, and very white, sits on this side of the cabinet and it gets its light from this window right here, which has helped it maintain that variegation and put out these beautiful white leaves. So this plant itself is a great example of different light sources and how it's going to produce that variegation. So the rule of thumb with most houseplants, and definitely any variegated houseplants, is if you do not give them appropriate lighting, they will begin to revert back to green. And this is because they cannot photosynthesize through the white parts of the plant. So take this leaf, for example, it is extremely white. It can photosynthesize only through those tiny little green dots. So that means when this plant is trying to convert energy from light, it can only do it through those tiny little green spots because those spots are the only place in this plant leaf that has chlorophyll in it. Whereas this leaf right here is a huge, massive green leaf, which can give this plant lots of energy and lots of nutrients from that light. So if the plant feels like it's in danger because it's not able to get enough light, it will start to protect itself by putting out green leaves, and they will become greener and greener and greener. And you're gonna go, oh my goodness, my beautiful Marble Queen has turned green. And that's because it's telling you, I'm not getting enough light and I have to do this in order to survive. So what you can do if your plant is starting to revert and you're panicked and you just want to get that beautiful variegation back, you can propagate and cut some that have a stem that has a lot of variegation on it and try and encourage the variegation to come back that way. Mostly the lighting is going to be the big issue. So the first thing I would do is make sure you move your plant to a really nicely lit area and see if you can get that variegation to come back, and it will in most cases. The other thing with this plant, and in particular lighting, If you don't have it in an area that has enough light, then it will start to space its leaves out on the stem really far apart, and it will also put out smaller leaves. So that's a great way to tell if your plant is happy and doesn't have enough lighting or not. So you can see on this vine in particular, the internodal spacing is it's a couple inches. It could be a little closer together, but this vine is not one that got a huge amount of lighting. And you can see that it's actually turned its vines around to face that window. This is one that sits right on the very corner. So it's actually flipped the direction of the leaves upwards and over to try and get to that light. The plants will always try and find that light source. So trouble for this plant is mainly going to come in the form of watering issues, and that can be root rot. Just like any other houseplant, these are susceptible to root rot. So you want to make sure that you keep them on an even watering schedule and you do not overwater this plant. I like to water mine every 1.5 to 2 weeks. I really don't water them any more than that. I really let them dry out quite a bit. And then when I do water them, I take it down from that place and I will bottom water it. And a lot of times I will make sure it is super saturated. I will leave it in a bowl of water for usually about 10 to 15 minutes to make sure it is fully saturated and it had a really good drink of water. And propagating this plant is very easy. One of my favorite things to do because I can easily share it with people. What you're going to do is you're going to take sharp, sterile scissors or a knife and you're going to make a clean cut right in between the nodes. So this is the internodal spacing here, and the nodes live right at those leaf joints. So you're going to cut there, place the roots and the node down into a cup of water, and they will grow roots. Usually within a couple weeks, you'll start to see new roots growing. You just want to keep those propagations in an area that has a lot of light. And I like to add water to it once a week or so because it helps add oxygen into the water, which helps those roots grow even quicker. My favorite potting mix for this beautiful plant is my aeroid mix that I always use, which is about 60% potting mix. I like to use a peat-based potting mix, and 20% extra perlite and 20% orchid bark. The aeroids love orchid bark. It adds a lot of space and light in that root system, and it helps that soil not get too wet and compact around those roots. If you have just straight potting mix in there, a lot of times when the water saturates it, that soil clumps and it gets really heavy and it won't dry out. It sits and leaves moisture around those roots, which then often leads to root rot. If your plant is growing slowly and you want to encourage quicker growth, you can give it good amounts of fertilizer once every 4 to 6 weeks or so. I just like to fertilize it in early spring, which is the start of the growing season. You can see we're in early spring right now and I have new leaves popping out on every single vine. So this plant is telling me, hey, I'm about ready to start really growing. So you want to encourage that by giving fertilizer every 4 to 6 weeks. Your pothos plant can get a little root bound. This is not a plant that you're gonna bring home from the nursery and immediately repot unless you see signs of roots coming out of the bottom or it's drying out really quickly because it's really eating up that water source very quickly. This one has been sitting in this same 6-inch pot for probably 2 years and it has done great. I'm still not seeing signs that it needs to be repotted very soon. It's very long. I can imagine it's got a ton of roots sitting in there. So I'm probably going to wait on it at least another 6 months before I repot it into a bigger size. When you move up in pot size for this plant, you're only going to want to move up an inch or two. If you move up too big, you can risk getting root rot because again, we have that excess soil that sits and holds moisture around the roots. Okay, that's all I have on the Marble Queen Pothos plant. If you guys have any questions, please leave them down below and I will do my best to answer them for you. I also have a blog post on all of the care points for this plant if you want to check that out. It should answer any additional questions that you have. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, you can follow me on Instagram at The Contented Plant. I would love to chat with you on there. We will see you next time. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.